Hello? Hello? Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. One more time. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. My name is Kelly Britt. I'm Program Manager at NUSCC, and I'd like to thank you all for coming out for our workshop. This is a workshop, so we want you to put your thinking caps on, have fun, deal with the map pieces. Just a few housekeeping rules. We do have the keypads, so if you do not have one, let one of us on staff know, and we will get you one. Also, we want you just to have fun. Your facilitator will give you all the rules and regulations of the game. So all the facilitators at the table, please raise your hand so they all know who you are. Does any table not have a facilitator? Okay, we're good. All right, so I'm going to introduce Fred Wright. He is the president of the Akron Urban League, and he's going to start off our program this evening. Thank you.
I was getting ready to say, y'all can clap for me. I'm doing extra overtime today. Again, I want to say welcome. My name again is Fred Wright. I'm the president and CEO of the Akron Urban League, and you're currently in President's Hall. Remember that, this is President's Hall, and if you want to get a nice shot of me, I have a portrait on the other side of it. But this is I am very pleased to be here tonight, and I do this a lot. I was just doing this yesterday because we had a luncheon here. I'm kind of always in the position of kind of introducing somebody, facilitating, emceeing, and that sort of thing. So I got used to this kind of thing, but I always know some rules. When your wife is here, you introduce her, and my wife is here. Right. And then I had some staff who stayed, and I'm so proud of them that they supported me. There's 3 of them over there. Please stand so they can see you, wave your hand. I told them they have some chips that they can cash in with me now, so they're going to get a little extra time. But again, I'm going to say good evening to everyone, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. This is the Northeast Ohio Sustainable Communities Consortium. I'm a member of the Board of Directors and the Executive Committee. We're very excited to launch our Vibrant NEO with the first round of public workshops. By attending this event tonight, you'll be joining hundreds of residents from all over Northeast Ohio in a process that will, by the end of the year, produce what we hope is a framework and a vision for a sustainable future for this region. We'd like to kick off tonight's workshop with a short introduction from Dave Liebreth, retired City of Akron Deputy Mayor and Chief of Staff. Dave retired from the City of Akron December 1st after serving 10 years as the Deputy Mayor and Chief of Staff for Mayor Don Pasquale. 2 weeks ago, he just like me, he can't say no. 2 weeks ago, the Board of Directors of the University Park Alliance hired Dave to manage the Community Development Corporation following the resignation of their director. Dave was instrumental in the development of downtown Akron over the last decade and was primarily responsible for the success of Lock 3 and Lock 4, the city entertainment venues. I've only been here 2 years in Akron, but I had some connection with Akron when I was the CEO of the Lorain County Urban League. But one thing I found out about Akron, if you want to know anything about Akron, ask Dave Liebreth. He knows the history of everybody in Akron and where the bodies are buried here in Akron. Dave knows. And so, without further ado, I'm going to present to some and introduce to others Mr. Akron, Dave Liebreth.
Thank you, Fred, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As we like to say at Lock 3 before every performance, isn't it a beautiful night in downtown Akron? Look at that out there. We deserve this after the winter that we've been having. Thanks so much for being here, and thanks for spending an evening and participating in this very important session and the product that it's going to produce. 12 years ago, I was privileged to do 2 things at the same time: to lead Akron's 175th anniversary, looking back, and also Akron's forward-looking, Imagine Akron 2025. I looked forward, I looked back, I looked forward, I looked back. I mean, it's a wonder I didn't have whiplash by the end of 2000. But what I did learn in that time is that Akron is a special place, and for a very good reason. The size of our community is our greatest advantage. If we were to do an experiment here tonight, go table to table, if you've lived here for any length of time, and Fred alluded to it, you would find a connection with just about everybody in the room. Somebody you know in common. It's that old 6 degrees of separation. But I'll bet you know that we probably have more like 3 degrees of separation in this room. That becomes our advantage, our willingness to collaborate, our ability to get things done in a very, very short time. And although that we have great challenges, and you're going to address some of those tonight, boy, do we have, by and large, very good news about our community. I don't know if you noticed in the business page of the Beacon Journal this week, but MarketWatch has now listed Akron as 27th in the nation in top cities for business growth. Now, we're the 71st largest city in the country, but our numbers for exceeding business growth exceeded Columbus, Cincinnati, Toledo, and Youngstown. The Brookings Institution said that Akron's metro was among only 40 in the country that has recovered strongly from the 2008 recession. Now, there are still people hurting who haven't felt that yet, but we are among 34 cities in the country that have accelerating output from manufacturing, and among just 24 cities that gained jobs throughout the entire year of 2011. This is not without hard work, and it's not without our legacy. We don't use some terms to describe our city that other people do in New York. I refer to it as something called, I think it's Rust Belt. It's a name I've heard before. We are truly a legacy city. We were the industrial strength of the nation. We armed America in World War I and World War II. We have this massive infrastructure that needed to be turned around like an ocean liner in the middle of the ocean in order to make it work for the 21st century. But with the cooperation of so many of our government leaders, some are here tonight who are such a collaborative group of people, it didn't happen without the work of our social service agencies, our business community. We are poised to be among the leading legacy cities in the United States going forward in the 21st century. What will guarantee that? Well, everybody else who is elected to public office, involved in the business community, is doing what they can do. What it's going to really require are you, people who are engaged and who are interested in the future, to contribute your ideas, your willingness to serve, and with that, the combination of all of those things will continue to make us what I like to call and refer to as we are the city at the summit for lots of good reasons. Thank you so much for your participation tonight, and I know you're going to get a lot out of this evening's presentation. Thanks.
Told you knew everything about Akron, didn't I? Now we're going to have a brief video describing NLSCC, Vibrant Neo, in our wonderful region. I believe I'm on script.
You are right on script.
Ohio, Northeast Ohio, Ashtabula, Cuyahoga, Geauga, Lake, Lorraine, Mahoning, Medina, Portage, Stark, Summit, Trumbull, and Wayne counties. Northeast Ohio, home to 3.8 million people from 117 ethnic groups who speak more than 60 languages. We live in 375 different cities, villages, and townships. We have the 12th largest regional economy in the United States, which generates $170 billion annually and employs more than 2 million people. We are home to 24 Fortune 1000 companies and 62 hospitals. Today, our 27 accredited colleges and universities are teaching more than 210,000 students. We have thousands of farms which produce more than 200 different crops that generate more than $2.5 billion annually for our economy. We have 150 local parks, 17 state parks, and 275 miles of hiking and biking trails. And our national park is the 10th most visited park in the country. In fact, 90% of all Northeast Ohioans live within 1 mile of a park or protected space. And amazingly, with all of these things going for us, the cost of living in Northeast Ohio is 10% below the national average. Most important, Northeast Ohio is our home. We are part of a unique region situated on a great lake, a region full of assets and resources that we need to protect and grow. We need to make good choices about Northeast Ohio's future to create a vision for what we want Northeast Ohio to be in the future. Building a framework and set of tools to develop a common regional vision is what the Northeast Ohio Sustainable Communities Consortium was created to do. The Northeast Ohio Sustainable Communities Consortium, NEOS, is a collaboration among 33 organizations from across Northeast Ohio. These organizations are working through NEOS to make sure Northeast Ohio remains a vibrant, resilient, and sustainable place to live, work, and raise a family. Creating a vibrant NEO requires us to work together to protect and build upon our assets. It also requires that we confront our region's challenges together. Northeast Ohioans have been spreading out more throughout the region. The amount of developed land per person went up by almost 23% between 1979 and 2006. Using more developed land costs money for the infrastructure to support it. The roads, power lines, sewer lines, and government services that are needed. And this happened while our population was declining. Over the last 4 decades, our population has dropped by 7%. So, we have more developed land, more infrastructure and maintenance costs, and fewer people to pay for it. We have great natural and built assets and ideas at the local level that should be realized. Now is the time to ask and decide.
What future do you want?
What future do you want?
Do you want?
What future do you want? What future do you want?
For Northeast Ohio. For Northeast Ohio.
So, what future do you want for Northeast Ohio?
You may all clap for that video. It was very nice. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Joseph Hadley, Executive Director of NEFCO, Northeast Ohio 4-County Regional Planning and Development Organization. I practiced that 10 times so I could get it right. With that being said, here's Mr. Joe Hadley.
To show you what kind of a guy Mr. Wright is, I told him he didn't have to give our full name. I would try to do that, and he nailed it. So thank you very much, Fred. And because we have, I have some board members on our board, I appreciate you coming tonight. And we promised everyone that we advertised about the meeting that it wasn't going to be 2 hours of people speaking up here. So I am going to present the overview of Vibrant Neo 2040. I'm going to talk about give an overview of scenario planning, talk about the business as usual, or actually turn it over to our consultant. And some of our consultants that are here from out of state are probably wondering why we don't list the weather as one of our assets, but it's just terrific. Is everyone hear me all right? Is that better? Okay, thank you. Sorry. Well, what is Vibrant Neo 2040? Simply, it's an opportunity for us to have a conversation. We're not creating a plan here. We're creating a vision. We want the future based on our values and our priorities. Vibrant Neo 2040 has a board, as I'll mention in a moment. The board was very clear and adamant that they wanted some products to turn the vision into reality. Those products are a dashboard, a toolkit and best practices, policy recommendations, and pilot programs. Now we're going to be developing those products concurrently with the development of a vision, which necessarily isn't the way you would want to do it, but that's the way we are doing it because of the time we have to put this together. But the point of this is that we want to be able to focus on the practicality of these products over the next 8 months. And so you'll be hearing more about those in the future. Well, what is Vibrant Neo 2040? Well, number one, it's the Northeast Ohio Sustainable Communities Consortium. And I noted to Fred that this name is shorter than NEFCO's name, so that's probably a good thing. NEOSCC, or NEOSC, is a nonprofit that was launched in a highly competitive, one-of-its-kind federal grant from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development as part of the Partnership for Sustainable Communities Initiative. The Sustainable Communities Initiative is an interagency collaboration between HUD, the U.S. Department of Transportation, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, working together, not having parallel plans that don't seem to interconnect. We've engaged many experts across Northeast Ohio, some 150 or more of those folks. We have a team that includes very skilled NEOSCC staff, a very experienced team of consultants, including Sasaki and Associates, who you hear from shortly, Freeganese Associates, Nelson Nygaard, Cobalt Group, City Architecture, and our strategy. But really, Vibrant Neo Ohio 2040 is about you, and you talking about it to your family, trying to get your neighbors to be involved. That's what we really need as input as we evolve this vision. This is a year of learning for us. As we go through the scenario planning and the creation of products, we're going to be learning about the region. We're going to be finding out what is valued by its residents and leaders, what works. And we're going to be building the capacity to act and implement the vision through these action products. Here's our region. A little dark, but 12 counties stretching from Ashtabula to Wayne. Over 3.8 million people. Now the size of this region, I'm sure the largest of the grantees across the country that have received this funding. It presents both challenges and opportunities. You know, there isn't one city that is driving all of the decisions. We've got a multiple of metropolitan areas. But you know, when you think about it, we all cross many of these boundaries through our work, through recreation, visiting friends, going to school, or just visiting new sites. And from that, I think we can learn together about what we really appreciate and what we want for the future. Some of the things that we've heard through the NEOS very active engagement process is we have a great deal of pride in our regional assets that we should preserve and protect. But we also know that growth is critical for us to continue to be competitive and vibrant. Some of the other issues that we've learned are related to our various connections to other entities and to other features, and what reinvestments we might want to make in the future. And as you know, there have been lots of headlines that point out the challenges in our region. But if you're an optimist like I am, you also have noted that there are documentation and headlines of some of the great work that's being accomplished on the ground today. So it's not all certainly gloom and doom. One of the things we've learned, as you know, is that there are more or less 5 realities that you could say in the area across the region. So 5 realities, recurring themes. One of them, some of you who are elected officials know this very well, about the loss of funding, federal funding, stress on our resources, both natural and cultural, rising infrastructure costs, roads, sewer, water. Land use and transportation affects all of us and all of our budgets. And clearly our economy needs to be stronger. So what we need as folks that are helping develop this vision is we need the perspectives of as many Northeast Ohioans as possible. You know, hopefully you can go back and talk to your neighbors and family about this and find out that this is not some abstract thing that some planners are putting together. But we really need that input so that we can create a real vision, a real picture of what the region's future should look like and what our needs are. Oops. Sorry, I skipped one ahead. Now I'd like to introduce James Miner from Sasaki and Associates.
Thanks, Joe. Can we use this guy, or should I use this one?
Use that one.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? No. We got this mic turned off. Maybe I'll use this one. How about now? That works. If we do our job right, you're going to be clapping at the end of the night too, so hopefully we'll do that. This is the third night of our 6-stop tour through the region. Clearly we've saved the best for last. It's great to see a full house. It's really excellent that you're all here, so thank you for coming out tonight. I'm just going to reiterate the points that were made briefly before I dive in, that I'm one of those out-of-town consultants that Joe mentioned. Our job is not to tell you what we think the regional vision ought to be in Northeast Ohio. Our job is to facilitate a process that gets you engaged, gives you the tools that you need to tell us what the vision is going to be, and then provide you the tools that are going to allow you to get there. And I'm going to show you evidence of that right away, because I'm going to break up the presentation by doing some polling. You should have all received one of these keypads when you walk through. If you didn't raise your hand, we can get you one. What we're going to do, we're going to have a couple rounds of questions that we want you all to respond to. We're going to start off before I share with you some of the information about the scenario planning process and the business as usual scenario that we've prepared for you tonight. That'll get you ready for the table exercise. And then we're going to do this again towards the end to kind of take the temperature of the room and see where you stand on some of the issues that we want to talk about. So this first question is a warm-up question. This just gets everybody used to the technology and helps us understand how many of you have participated in a meeting like this before. So the question is, have you participated in a public workshop before? Press 1 on your keypad if the answer is yes and you love it. And if the answer is yes and you don't love it, well, still push 1. And if you've never done anything like this, push number 2. And you'll see the results almost instantaneously once we get a tally. I can see that we've got a number going up. We've almost got 80 responses. I don't know how many we have in the room tonight, but I'm sure we have about 100, maybe 2. So we have 82 responses. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll here. Most of you love it. Okay. At least you've been to a meeting before. That's good. But there's a fair number of you that haven't. So I hope this is a positive experience for you, and you will come back. There's going to be other opportunities throughout the process to do more of this work together. The second question, how do you feel about the future of Northeast Ohio? This is a question about the region. Right? I don't know how all of you identify with or don't identify with the region as we've laid it out, this 12-county area. But given what you know, how do you feel about the future of Northeast Ohio? Are you feeling 1, very optimistic, 2, somewhat optimistic, 3, neutral, 4, somewhat pessimistic, or 5, very pessimistic? So take a minute and hit those. I can see the responses are going up. Give you a couple seconds and I'll close it. Here we go. It's interesting. We're doing this at each of our meetings, and sometimes we get similar responses, sometimes we get different responses. This has been the overwhelming response that I've witnessed. Somewhat optimistic seems to be the consistent answer to this question, which is good. We need optimism. Now, this is a question about how you perceive the future of your community within the overall region of Northeast Ohio. It's the same series of answers. The top answer, number 1, very optimistic. 2, somewhat optimistic. 3, neutral. 4, somewhat pessimistic. Or 5, very pessimistic. As you can imagine, sometimes what we're looking for in this type of question is some people are feeling very optimistic about where they live, but they're not so sure about the region, or vice versa. We'll see if there's consistency among the answers here as I close this down. Pretty similar, actually, a little more optimism at the local level. And that's, again, a fairly common response. It's a scale which we can understand. It's the places where we live. A little less certainty about what's going on outside of our communities. This last question, actually there's one more after this, looks at the link between where you live and your place within the region. So how do you feel your community's future, positive or negative, is linked to the rest of the communities in Northeast Ohio? Is it significantly, that's the top answer, significantly linked to the rest of the region, somewhat or not really, would be the third one. So go ahead and vote for that. I'll close it down here. A few more votes in there. So people are feeling connected. That's also excellent. A lot of what this is going to take is understanding what we do locally and how it impacts the region and how we're connected to one another. Connection is a really big theme for what we're trying to do here. On this one, you get 2 choices. What are the 2 most important factors to choose for you when you're choosing a place to live? Is it a short trip to work, number 1, 2, good schools, 3, close to shopping and dining and the conveniences of life, 4, a quiet neighborhood, or 5, access to parks and open space? Again, you can choose your top 2. Getting close to my target number of 80. A couple more votes. All right. Let's see how we did. Pretty even distribution. Quiet neighborhood ranks the top. Good schools and open space close. Second, short trip to work, close to shopping, dining. They're all important. But we're starting to see a sense of priority. These are the kinds of things that we're going to want to measure when we look at the scenarios for the future. How are the actions at the local and regional levels affecting your access to these things which you feel are valuable to you where you live? So keep that in mind. Just going to walk you through now a bit of the presentation, starting with this, just a bit of background on the scenario planning process so you're all familiar with what we're trying to do. This process really starts with what we call the business as usual scenario. It's essentially a baseline trend. What we do is we look back in time for, in this case, we're looking back 20 years to figure out where we've been and where we are and where we're going based on that trend. So it's a simple projection forward of actions that we take today and have taken over the past 20 years. And if we look at what happens if we do the same thing up to the year 2040, what does the region look like? That's a really valuable tool for us as we measure alternatives. So we can say, this is the baseline, this is what we know. If we decide to change things and do things differently, what are the different strategies that we can think of that will have the biggest impacts on our priorities? So it allows us to get some major issues on the table as we look at the baseline trend. What do we like? What don't we like? What do we want to protect? What do we want to change? What are the strategies that are going to help us get there? And down the road, looking at ways to provide incentives for community action in alignment with the regional vision. It's important to note that the regional plan is not a mandate. This is not a binding plan. It's a vision, and its goal is to align what's happening at the local and community level with our neighbors in other counties within the region, and to provide incentives to allow that to happen. The time frame for the study looks at a horizon from today, 2013, to the year 2040, so we're looking out into the future in a significant way. If you're in college now, or if you've just graduated from college, or you have kids in school, some of you are here in this age range, these are the people who are going to be in their 40s and 50s by the end of this timeline in the year 2040. These are the people who we are going to have leading the way, whether it's in the business community or government. So this is an important demographic for this study. We're really planning far into the future. Many of this demographic either left home and didn't come back, or left home and may come back, and we need to look at reasons how we can get people to stay in the region or come back if they've gone away. The primary mechanism for looking at the scenarios and their impacts is we're going to be tracking physical change. You see some maps on the table. We're going to be looking at a lot of maps. They give us really good data. They give us good visual tools to understand the impacts of different demographic shifts or changes in employment. So you're going to see a lot of that, and we're going to be interpreting the maps. So those of you who don't like maps, never fear. I'm a planner, I like them, but we can interpret them in many ways, and you'll see some of that tonight. We have a pretty robust methodology behind this. We're using very reliable nationally and state databases. So we had a bit of a challenge in identifying a methodology. Whenever we do this, it has to be specific to the region. We have to have consistency of data across every community and county within the region. So we've designed a process that's specific to Northeast Ohio. Worked very closely with the staff at NEOS to do that. And they've also brought in a number of local experts to vet the methodology that's gone into what you're going to see tonight. There are three major phases to the work that we're going to do by the end of the year. The first phase that we're in now, and actually tonight, is the kind of summation of this initiation and data collection phase and the creation of the business as usual scenario. We're going to have a series of workshops throughout. We're going to develop alternative scenarios that, as I mentioned, measure the impacts of different choices on the region. And together we're going to define a preferred direction or preferred scenario for what we want the region to become. One of the things that we're going to do along the way is we have a tool called Imagine My Neo. It's an online platform that allows people to do what you're going to do tonight, essentially. Look at the future of the region, identify your priorities, and figure out how different actions at the regional level affect your individual priorities. It's a very important tool that allows us to reach beyond the public meeting like we're having tonight, reach to people who are not in the region who we want to draw back. So it's a very powerful tool, and we're excited to launch it in a couple months here. So the business as usual scenario, this is the main highlight for tonight. As I said, this is the main question we're trying to answer. What happens if the trends and policies of the past continue to the year 2040? As I mentioned, we've decided as part of this exercise to look back 20 years. We went back all the way to the 1970s and looked at the different variations that we could imagine. The reality for this region, as you all know, there was a great deal of jobs lost to deindustrialization of the region. That's a trend. Obviously, it's not going to continue. It happened. There aren't any more industrial jobs to lose. So by going further back in time, the picture actually looked worse. We're thinking it's a little more optimistic than what we've seen in the past. This is the time frame that we think gives us the most accurate picture of what's going on in the region and what's likely to continue if nothing else changes. As you can see on the top chart, the population between 1990 and current 2010 is flat, right? We had a peak in a little bit of a rise in the year 2000, but it's back down. And the same for employment. We've seen an increase in parks and conservation. If we go out to 2040, this is what it looks like. And these are the numbers that we're using to generate the maps and to think about the baseline scenario. We can also look at that data by county, so we can understand a little bit of what's going on in the region. As you know, there isn't, even though the population is flat, we see growth. We see signs of growth. We see new buildings. We see new companies and new jobs. We also see homes being abandoned. We also see jobs being lost. So on a county-by-county basis, not everybody's losing, not everybody's winning, but there's a lot of churn. So in the aggregate, we're essentially gaining, based on the trend, 3,100 new residents each year. Some are winners, some are losers. The historical trend for jobs does much about the same. We have 3,600 new jobs each year. You can see the relationship between the different counties. So recognizing that there is this difference between counties, and one of the things we want to discuss as part of the regional vision is how can we cooperate at the regional scale to turn that trend around. That demographic data and the employment data generates demand for physical space. As new jobs come online, there's a need for new office space. As jobs relocate, those jobs move to other places, they need a place to be. As people relocate, they need houses to live in. Those numbers give us land use types, which we can put on a map. Mixed use is any combination of retail, office, and residential use. There are different types of commercial uses, from storefront retail on our main streets to larger office buildings. In the suburbs, there are different kinds of industrial uses, which we can map. Different kinds of housing typologies, which we can look at, more urban typologies, multifamily attached or suburban detached single-family housing, rural housing, lower density. We see all of these throughout the region in each county. There's also obviously a lot of agricultural land. There's land dedicated for parks and conservation. One of the things on the far right, you see abandoned parcels. We're looking very closely at residential abandonment as one of the key indicators going forward, something we want to understand and be able to track. And then we have two other essentially catch-all categories which describe everything else. We have other unbuilt. These are forests and natural lands which aren't yet placed into conservation, cemeteries, utility easements, and so forth, generally green type spaces and other built. These are generally the paved type spaces, roads, parking lots, airports. This is a map then that uses those land use typologies and projects them onto the region as it is today. And I realize the scale is immense, and it's not so important to pay attention to the detail at this phase, but I want to show you what it looks like today and what it will look like in the year 2040. We can go back and forth. You can start to see there are some land uses which are changing. The two big ones are parks and conservation and abandonment, by the way. But I understand this is not easy to interpret. So let's look at it. Let's break it down and understand what we're seeing. In terms of the types of land uses that we're painting on that map, this is essentially the building blocks for generating that business as usual map in the year 2040. We have 120,000 acres of new parks and land conservation based on the trend. We have 92,500 acres of new development based on the trend. And we have 77,000 acres of land being abandoned. You can do the math. 92,000 acres of new development, 77,000 being abandoned. It's only 15,000 acres of net new development, right? There's a big trade-off going here. We understand there's some churn in the region as new jobs are being created, as new houses are being built. Jobs are leaving some areas. People are leaving homes in other areas. We can further tell the story through these three separate lenses. Obviously, the abandonment one, which I mentioned, we can look at this pattern of outward migration that's occurring in the region and understand what that means, and also look at it from a fiscal impact standpoint. What does it mean relative to the fiscal health of our communities and our tax base, and ultimately down to the individual taxpayer? This map, relative to abandonment, this shows just isolating that abandonment notion of where parcels are today that are vacant or abandoned. Right? You can start to see a scattering on the map. You can see it a little more definitive in this color, in this version of the map where you're just isolating it. We're seeing growth and abandonment in our urban areas. This is something, again, it's not a surprise. We're seeing it in Cleveland. We're seeing it in Youngstown. We're seeing it in Warren. We're seeing it in Kent. We're seeing it in Akron. We see it on the ground. We see it on the map. But what does it mean? If we quantify that a different way, if we look at the number of housing units in the region in the year 2010, 1.667 million housing units, 1 in 10 of those units will be abandoned by the year 2040. That's what that map is telling us. We know the impacts to the community. We see them. We understand them. We understand it's an impact for people who live there in terms of their property value and their quality of life. It's an impact to our fiscal health of our community in terms of the demolition and cleanup costs to keep our neighborhoods safe. Put another way, between now and the year 2040, every day, 18 units will be abandoned in the region. That's a fact, based on the trend, unless we want to change it. The cost of that, and this is a fairly conservative estimate, this isn't a full cleanup, this is $525 million in demolition costs, assuming we get 30% of those units offline at a cost of $10,000 per unit. A lot of that's being caused by this pattern, this outward migration. This is a heat map of the region looking just at housing density. So the brighter the yellow, the more dense the housing. Typically a pattern where you see denser housing in the urban areas. This is the traditional form of development in this country. As we've been expanding and as we've been changing our lifestyles and thinking of new ways to develop, you can see that spreading out. The urban areas become less defined, they become more joined together, and we can see the connections between them as housing spreads out between them. The same is true for jobs. The darker, the lighter the blue, the higher the density of jobs. The lighting in here is not helping us out. Trust me, it's the same. So it really gets back to that story of regional churn. What are the impacts of that, though, when we look at governance, for example, and fiscal health? It really does increase fragmentation, and that's a challenge when you're trying to think regionally. We have a 12-county area with 201 municipalities, 183 townships, 191 school districts, 116 special taxing districts today. That's over 700 taxing entities across the region. That number will continue to go up with the pattern that we see. It's hard to collaborate when those numbers are so high. Relative to infrastructure, The current mode of development in the region will generate demand for about 3,700 lane miles of new road in the region. We can look at what that means just to put a scale on it. It's essentially enough pavement to get us from Cleveland to Panama. Is that a lot? Is that more than other places? These are good questions. But we can understand the fiscal impact of these, and you'll see infrastructure is one of those things that really drives fiscal impacts. It's the highest single determinant in understanding the fiscal health of a community tends to be around infrastructure costs. So it's an important factor to consider. When we look at the fiscal health of communities, this graph shows us in 2010 on the left where we are relative to local government revenue and spending rates by counties. So that zero, that black line across the top, represents a balanced budget. And across the region by county, some you can see are taking in more revenue than they're spending. Some are spending more than they're taking in. On average, though, there's a deficit of 1.5% in each county within the region today. Going forward to the year 2040, if we use the data that's generated by the baseline trend, we can see everybody is negatively impacted in the region. You can see that chart on the right slips down. The average goes to 20% below. Everybody moves into the negative. All counties experience declining revenues compared with cost. And importantly, the most fiscally strong county in the year 2040, which is here, is weaker than the weakest county today. The reasons for that, a lot of it centers around jobs. Stagnant employment means less employment or less income tax revenue for the municipalities. Abandonment also affects property tax revenue. It also introduces, as I mentioned, maintenance and demolition costs to the mix. And here's the big one. So infrastructure cost. The current average is about $38,000 per household. You can see the chart. It varies by where you are. It varies by county. It varies by the type of development within each county. The more urban counties tend to have more density, therefore the infrastructure costs per unit go down. The less urban counties have higher costs per unit, but on average, if you aggregate, it's about $38,000 per unit. So that's a big factor when we go forward. This infrastructure cost is one of the things, as I mentioned, that has a big determinant on fiscal health. Something to be mindful of. Okay. So that's what it's telling us. Now we want to know what you think about what you've seen before we dive into the exercise at the table. So, based on what you've seen, how concerned are you about the level of abandonment seen in the business as usual scenario? Are you 1, significantly concerned, 2, moderately concerned, 3, not concerned, 4, you don't believe this trend will continue, or 5, you don't have an opinion? All are valid answers, so let's go ahead and vote. Okay, give everyone a couple more seconds. You guys are getting faster. Either significantly or moderately concerned, I think clearly a majority answer. But there are some of you who are questioning whether this is a trend that will continue, so we need to look at that. This is another multiple choice one. You have 2 choices on this. What are the top 2 items that you believe would enable Northeast Ohio communities to retain residents and also to attract new ones? Would it be better public transportation, higher quality schools, number and variety of jobs available, 4, safety, 5, lower taxes, or 6, better housing options? You can choose 2. Okay, place your bets. Close it up. Jobs. Okay. Jobs and schools. That seems like a pretty clear majority in this room, at least. We're going to be, just so you know, as I mentioned, we're doing this in each of the 6 communities that we're having these meetings, and we're going to roll up all these results, and we'll make that information available as soon as we can so people can see how opinion varies across the region. How much would you agree or disagree with the following? We should continue to grow outward to create new jobs and housing. Right? This is pretty much the pattern that we see today. It's what's been happening. Would you 1, agree, 2, somewhat agree, 3, you're neutral, 4, somewhat disagree, or 5, disagree?
What do you mean by outward?
Away from the urban cores, right? Our identifiable urban areas within the region. So growing outward from Akron, growing outward from Canton, growing outward from Cleveland, Youngstown, Warren, all of those communities that have historically been the centers. What we're seeing now is a trend where jobs are moving away from those. They're moving to locations along the interstate, major intersections. This is not unique to Northeast Ohio, by the way. This is something that's happening across the country. The question is, do you think that's good, or would you rather see something else? See how we do in this room. We didn't do a very good job of choosing the color bars on this, and it got me into trouble. That's disagree, and it's hard to see, but that seems to be the primary response. To somewhat disagree in purple. It's the next highest response. This question asks you the inverse. By the way, you can have it both ways. This is one question. We could do a bit of both. But how much would you agree or disagree with the following? Should we reinvest in existing communities to create new jobs and housing? So instead of growing outward, let's reinvest in our existing communities to create new jobs and housing. Would you 1 agree, 2 somewhat agree, 3 feel neutral, 4 somewhat disagree, or 5 disagree with that statement?
What do you mean by reinvest?
Areas that are already built, primarily.
No, who's doing the investing?
It's a good question. It could be a number of ways. It could come through a number of ways.
Whose money are we reinvesting?
Okay, here's what I'm going to do relative. That's up to you. That's up to you, and that's to be determined. The question is, do you think it's a good idea? Right? There's a number of ways that can happen. And that's actually the good point. That's actually, we want to stay away from where it's coming from and understand, should we even do it? Okay? I've got 80 responses.
Oh, wait, I'm not done.
Go for it. Get it in there. Okay. So most agree, and clearly, the question needs to be, how are we going to do it? That's a big question, it's a valid question, and it's one we're going to explore.